Hey Aurora, welcome back to Quarantine, Coffee, and Jesus. So we are still working through Colossians slowly but surely. And this week we are going to be looking at chapter 2. And I'm going to specifically be looking at verses 9 through 15 today. So let's just jump right in and read through those verses, and then we'll break them down together a little bit. All right. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God, who raised him from the dead. In you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses. By canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands, this he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them. So, first of all, shout out to Nicole, who wrapped up chapter 1 for us last week. And she took a moment to just brag on Paul for a little bit and express her appreciation for him. And I loved that, and I actually want to jump on that bandwagon as well. So I woke up at 3 a.m. the other night to let the dog out. And for whatever reason, I was probably thinking about preparing for this, but for whatever reason, Paul was on my mind, and I was just thinking about like how much we can learn from him, which seems weird. This is quarantine life, so I'm thinking about the Apostle Paul in the middle of the night. Who knew? But here he is in prison, and he has not let his foot off the gas at all, right? Like he could have easily given up once he was in prison and just been like, you know what, there's nothing I can do from here. I'm going to leave everything that's going on out there to people who are free and not in chains and not behind a prison cell to deal with it. But he didn't. We would have all understood if he did, but he didn't. He is arguably more passionate and more determined to work for the kingdom than he ever has been. And that really convicted me when I was thinking about that, because at a time right now where it would be really easy for me to coast and to take it easy and to use the excuse that there's really not much I can do in the confines of my own home, this is when we're needed more than ever, and this is when we're supposed to step up the most. So I was really convicted by that, because Paul is sitting here seeing like and hearing about the deception and the false theology, right, that's being spread like wildfire among the Colossians, and he makes it his personal mission to correct it and remind them of truth. And so I was thinking, like, do I have that same urgency? Do we have that same urgency right now when probably like the most people in history are listening, right? They're willing to listen. They're looking for answers. They're looking for truth right now because they have the time and things are really scary. And so while people are listening, are we going to let like false teaching and incorrect theology kind of swoop in and fill their minds? Or are we going to step up, and are we going to be the ones who are willing to speak truth? So that's my first, I guess, like challenge or question for us as we think through this. So here we go. Verse 9 starts with the word for, which literally points back to something that was just said, right? So it comes after like a command or a statement or a directive to like justify why that was said. It's an explanation. It could probably be switched out for the word because. Do this because, or do this for whatever. So let's rewind and read verse 8 so that we kind of understand what Paul is saying in verse 9. So let's look at verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, and according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So we know so far, we've learned so far that there has been an issue of false teaching circulating among the Colossians. And while Paul doesn't explicitly tell us what that is, we can sort of figure it out or gather what has been falsely communicated based on what he's really trying to undo and what he's trying to impress upon them. We can kind of like do the work there. So Paul says, see to it that no one takes you captive. Or another version says, beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy. So this language paints the image of someone being led away as prey, right? Like an animal would lead another animal away as prey, or being taken hostage or being robbed. So Paul's in essence saying, like, look out, because these false teachers are trying to rob you of the truth of who Jesus is and what he has offered you through the free gift of salvation. It's been, as I was researching and studying this, some scholars think that the false teachers were basically teaching Gnosticism, which was stuff like God could not come in contact with a material world, so he didn't create it, but he sent kind of a lesser spirit or angel to create the world. And since he couldn't be in contact with sinful material beings, he sent a bunch of like mediator knockoffs to go between us in the material world and God. So at this time, like, they were starting to worship angels and really highly regard them. And they were also under the impression, due to man-made thinking, that it's like this cause and effect. So we get what we deserve. When we are good, we deserve to receive good. And when we're bad, we deserve to get bad things done to us or happen to us. So Paul's really like trying to impress upon them that God was the creator. He created all things and he was over all things. And he sent Jesus, who was fully God, as our mediator and our savior. And he is also trying to warn them and encourage them not to eliminate the role that grace plays in our lives. And that we don't serve a punitive God. It's not this like, well, if you do good, you get good. You do bad, you get bad. I think we all have experienced either we've done and tried to be as perfect as we can and hard things still happen to us. Like right now, we still lose people. We still have things done to us that seem really unfair. And on the flip side of that, maybe some of us have really messed up and done some really crappy things. And yet what we get is grace and mercy, and good things still seem to happen to us. So Paul is trying to say, like, hey, that's not how this works. Our God does not work that way. So that's kind of the whole backstory. That's verse 8, the setup to what Paul is about to say. So he says, for, or because, in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him who is the head of all rule and authority. So Paul is saying Jesus is fully God. It's not like he just reflects some parts of God or has like some divine components, or maybe looks like him a little bit, has his eyes, got his hair. No. The Colossians would have had a really hard time believing, based on what they were being taught, right, by these false teachers, that the divine spiritual realm could coexist with the physical material realm. So Paul's really driving home the fact that no, Jesus is God, fully God in the flesh with skin on. He embodies every single aspect, trait, and character of who God is. He also says that we have been filled in him, or another version says complete in him. Since Jesus is truly God, we are complete. We're not lacking anything. And this was important for the Colossians to hear, because this meant, if this was true, that they didn't need to go to these false promises and attractions that the false teachers were presenting to them. And so that kind of like brought up this question of, where do I feel incomplete? Or where do we feel like we're lacking something? And then what are we looking to, or who are we looking to complete us or fill us or to make sense of all of this? So I encourage you, like, rest in the fact that Jesus, who is fully God, in him we are complete, lacking nothing. And so he ends that verse, verse 10, by declaring that Jesus is supreme over all principalities and powers, including the angels, who they were starting to glorify and worship a little bit. So he's saying, like, Jesus is above them. He is so much better than them. He's not just another angel. So let's keep going in verses 11 and 12. In him also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh, by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God who raised him from the dead. So here Paul is making some pretty extreme claims, because we know circumcision was a mandatory ceremony for the Jewish people, and they were trying to make Gentiles who wanted to become Christians do the same thing. Circumcision was a big, big deal during that time. And most of the Colossian Christians who were going to be reading this letter were Gentiles who had never been physically circumcised. So what Paul is telling them is that they already have what it is that they've been trying to accomplish through some physical, extremely painful, I would assume, act. So they have, in essence, already been circumcised in a spiritual sense, which is far more important. And this happens, Paul says, by putting off the sins of the flesh. The Greek word for putting off paints this picture of stripping off and throwing out a dirty piece of clothing. So Paul goes on to talk about the role of baptism in their Christian walk. So he's contrasting this physical cutting off of flesh, which is only a change in your body, with the act of baptism, which demonstrates an actual change of your heart. Baptism illustrates like the death, the putting to death of the old self, our burial with Jesus, and our resurrection and new life with him. And at Flatirons, we usually do baptisms about twice a year, and it's amazing. We party and we celebrate and we cry, and it's perfect. And we believe that baptism is just an awesome outward demonstration of an inward choice and transformation that can only be accomplished by the work that Jesus did on the cross for us. But we don't claim that if you haven't been baptized or you don't get baptized that you're not saved or you're not a Christian, you're not going to heaven. Not at all. What Paul is saying here is that the ceremony of baptism is far more meaningful and personal than the ceremony of circumcision. And he's clear to say that neither of these ceremonies save you or secure your salvation. It's only through the free work of salvation that Jesus accomplished that we are saved. So with that being said, if you haven't been baptized yet, and are interested or would like to take that step, we would love for you to get involved when we do our next baptism weekend. So stay tuned for that info. All right, let's bring this home. Verses 13 through 15. And you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. So before we encountered Jesus and rethought the way that we were living our lives, we were in fact basically dead in our sin. And we were in need of a Savior to give us new life. The best part is that Jesus made us alive together with him, right? Because new life and a new chance doesn't really matter at the end of the day if we don't get to do that in relationship with him. Like, that is the gift, right? To be in intimate relationship with him, to be able to approach him and pray to him and talk to him whenever we want, and have that loving relationship with him. So that is like a really important distinction of he made us alive together with him. And this next part I love because Paul says that God has canceled out the debt that stood against us, and he nailed it to the cross. That he defeated rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them. So if you've ever owed a friend a lot of money, I've been watching Ozark. Okay, we just finished Ozark season 3. Wild. This is not in my notes, but like the debt that they were in, whether it was like a debt to, okay, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but anyways, they're like indebted, right? And they're constantly trying to like repay and pay back and like catch up on this thing, and their lives are constantly in danger. It's crazy. Love it. Anyway, if you've ever been in serious financial debt, or maybe you've gotten hauled off to jail once or twice and the bail that they set was pretty high, you know that feeling, the one where you know there's no way you can ever repay it, like you're never gonna dig yourself out of this hole. You know that. And if someone ever came along or has ever come along and said, I took care of it, I bailed you out, I paid off every penny of what you owed, you're free, you're cleared, and it's off the record now. What would that feel like, or what has that felt like to you? That's exactly what Paul is telling them that Jesus did for us, but on such a bigger, more eternal level. He paid the price that we would have never been able to pay. We would have had to pay for it with our lives and still couldn't have paid off the debt. And he took on the debt and those accusations that were against us, the criminal charges against us, all of our sin, all of our shame, and he nailed it to the cross with himself when he died. And then he doesn't just stop at that. He offers us more gifts on top of like, hey, I paid off all your debt. I gave my life for you, but there's more. Like, I want relationship with you. I want to do this life with you now, before heaven, before eternal life begins. Like, I want to do this with you now, and I want it to be good. And so I want you to let that sink in for a little bit. And lastly, we get to partake in the victory that he has over all powers, spirits, and authorities. And this was powerful for the Colossians to understand, because they knew that Rome, the greatest governmental power at that time, and Judaism, which was the greatest religious power, were the two forces that actually worked together to put Jesus to death on the cross. And so it seemed for a few days that they had won. They had defeated Jesus. But then, 3 days later, you know the story, the greatest victory in the history of the world happened. And it's what we're about to celebrate this weekend on Easter Sunday. We're so excited. But Jesus defeated every government, every religion, and death in one breath. And it gives me chills, like makes me emotional thinking about that. Like that one breath he took 3 days later, in that breath, he defeated everything, right? He kept his promise to us. Like, that is what we hang our hats on. That is what we lean our entire life against. And if that's true, then we get to live in this victory. We get to claim that. And so here's kind of where my mind went as I was reading through that last verse, about that God triumphed over everything. So I played basketball in high school, and then I went on to play in college as well. But right before I went on to college, I blew out my ACL, completely severed it, and had to have reconstructive surgery, the whole thing. I would go on to have 5 more knee surgeries on that same knee over the next few years. So needless to say, I rarely stepped onto a basketball court during game time. I probably played in 2 to 3 games over my 4 years in college. But long story short, we qualified for our conference tournament all 4 years, and we went to the national tournament 3 out of 4 years. We had an incredible winning record, an incredible team. And guess what? I got that little W next to my name every single time, along with the people who actually played in the game and earned the win. I still got to claim that win. I still got to claim that I went to a national tournament every year, even though I didn't play a single second of the games we won. But I still got to enjoy every perk and privilege of those wins. And I got to claim and celebrate every victory because my team called me their own, right? They claimed me as part of the team and the family. And so I got to enjoy every victory. And that just gets me so fired up, right? Like that is what we get to claim in Jesus and being called his heirs. Those W's, that W on the cross is next to our name as well. We get to stand with our heads held high because Jesus wins. He outscored sin and shame, infectious disease, betrayal, divorce, and death and sin. He did it all. And so as we look forward to this coming weekend, I challenge you to think about what in your life needs to be put to death, right? Where do you need new life and resurrection and hope? And then when you have those things in mind, I want you to just believe and stand in the truth that Jesus has put those things to death. He did it when he died on that cross, and he has raised you into new life with him. He already did it, and you just have to stand in it and believe in it and walk in that this week. So that's my prayer for you, that you would walk in that truth and stand on that this week as we look forward to this coming Sunday, Easter Sunday. So that's all I have for you guys. Come back tomorrow. We'll be jumping in starting at verse 16. So reread Colossians again just to review that. But we love you guys so much. See you soon.